Welcome back to my garage. Thanks to you guys, we've got all the stuff we need to reassemble the engine now. Bearings, seals, pistons, and most important of all, a new crank. I realize I might have dropped the small end bearing somewhere. I have to go look for the small end bearing. Oh, there it is. Thank God. Thank God. And we've got a new microphone running. A more rugged thing this time. All metal. Panel mount microphone jack receivers with the threads to keep things really secure. So hopefully this will last longer under these conditions. We're going to do a couple of things before we start assembling. I'm going to start by drilling some lubricant holes for the far side of the bearings. I haven't done that earlier because I'm not sure it's really necessary, but it can't hurt, and there's no point in testing if it's necessary in this engine. So that's what we're going to do now. This other half doesn't have that convenient flat floor of the rotary valve intake. I'll have to create a flat spot with this end mill. And an end mill in a drill press isn't the best idea because it's not very rigid. But we'll go slow, and I'm hoping to get away with it. And I usually go for carbide end mills because they're stiffer, so less vibration in my CNC mill. But in this case, I'll use a high-speed steel cutter or end mill because they're more flexible, and that's probably might help out in this situation. Success. I'm chamfering the edges of the holes, and also I'm gonna open up this area to create a nice passage for oil to move in and out of the bearing on this side. And now on to preparing the piston. This body kit pistons from VRM comes with these two-eared circlips, and I don't trust this because there's a possibility for these ears to break off from the wrist pin pushing on them and maybe like creating a weak spot. So I'm going to use these plain C-clips, which are much harder to install, and they're impossible to get out of here again since there's no access slots. So I'll have to grind in an access slot. I'm using a roller bearing on one side, the rotary valve side, and then a ball bearing on the other side. The ball bearing is there to take up the actual load from a variator, or, well, actually at the moment there's no need for. I could have used rollers on both sides, but anyways, ball bearing on one side and then roller bearing on this side, and that's to have for the crank to be able to float in and out. So at high RPM, when it's bending, there's less resistance, less friction, because the crank is able to move in and out of the bearing. Well, actually the bearing race can move in and out. I know the bearing spun in this side at well, more than one point in time, so I'm going to use some Loctite to keep it secure. We don't want to run too much axial clearance, like 0.2 millimeters is 0.2 of a millimeter is more than enough for a small crank like this. We'll have to take a pretty accurate measurement of the space in the case, and then see how wide the crank is, and use the correct shims to get it into spec. This would have been a perfect job for a depth gauge, but this will have to do. 36.9 and 36.8, 72.17, 32.17, 42. I forgot about my parallel. That's 40.98, which means there's 1.17 millimeters of clearance. Well, we'll have to take up 1 millimeter, roughly 1 millimeter, so 0.5 millimeters on each side. 0.5. I don't think I pressed record. I pulled the crank into the bearing with some spacers and the crank and the nut. Pay attention to the large gap here. It's about, well, over a millimeter on each side, and that's to reduce viscous drag. So less friction or less drag. I actually forgot to buy new bolts. These are too long now. I'll have to go get some. I took measurements. It should be 50 millimeters. About 0.14, 15 of axial play, and I think that's enough for such a small crank. I think KTM specifies 0.2 millimeters for their like 350 or 450 or something engines. So this is probably good enough. Can't assemble the case before I have the bolts. So we'll give my cylinder a quick hone and a cleanup while waiting. Because if I leave for the bolts, then I won't have any more time when I get back here to continue working. I live in a fairly remote area. This is a diamond hone. Just a simple like brush would probably be more suited for this task, but I haven't got one. That's all that's needed. Still no dowel pins in the case, and I'm afraid of cutting some because maybe I'll cause some misalignment. It's easy enough just to align these two surfaces while assembling. And then I know, because they were cut in the same setup. Should be nice and straight and the same. Like if these two surfaces line up, everything should be good. I forgot the sealant. I'll bring you back after I've done the exact same thing, but remembered to put some glue in between the case halves. Stupid. Close to no gap at all. I'll have to file it some. Give it a little bit more, bring it up to around 0.3, I think. 0.3. Safe. And yet again I forgot to press record. I've torqued down the cylinder and now we're gonna install the head and check the squish gap. Point 53, 52, perfect. I've got this 3D printed ignition / rotary valve setting tool, which I'm going to use in conjunction with the rotary valve to get this in the right position. I want my base timing to be 30 degrees before top dead center. So with the rotary valve in there and this set, this sitting like this, that should be the case. Well, actually, like this. 30 degrees before top dead center with 39.3 stroke and a 90mm cone rod is 3.17 millimeters. There. I'll give this a whack. Now let's see if it's still at that correct position. Perfect. there's a slight leak somewhere. Now let's hope that's somewhere not important, like at the exhaust flange. Well, actually mostly just at the exhaust flange. It's here, around the rotary valve cover, which also isn't a big deal because I can get some sealant in there around the edge here to help out with sealing. The problem is I've cut this O-ring groove too deep, 1.5 millimeters deep, and the O-ring is 1.7, which means and obviously there's not enough clamping for it to seal around the edge here. So like a 2 millimeter O-ring would solve this, but I haven't got any 2 millimeter O-rings. None I can cut up and glue together either. So what we'll do is apply a good amount of sealer around the edge here. That will get squished down, and hopefully that works. Well, yet again I forgot. Christ. I applied a fat fillet of gasket of Yamabond 4 in the corner here, and also applied it to this surface. Hopefully this solves the issue. It actually seems to be worse than ever. Well, now I can't build pressure at all with this gauge, and I can't find a leak, which is odd. We're gonna give it some more. I'm gonna give it continuous airflow and see if we can pinpoint the leak. I can definitely hear it. It's the seal. Yeah, the seal around the rotary valve driver. I'll have to go get a new seal. That's it. And I'll have to take off this and I'll have to take off the cover again and clean up all the goo and then reapply all the goo. Okay, thinking about it, the leak got worse after I applied the goo and torqued down the cover. Probably it's not properly centered on the shaft, like the cover is not centered on the shaft. And because that seal was it kind of worn, like looser fit than what they usually are, and that's probably like how it didn't get torqued down, properly centered. Could maybe not be such a huge deal. Maybe when it's spinning and there's oil present and stuff, it will seal good enough to not be noticeable. We'll see. I don't want to spend 2 hours plus now going to pick up a seal, which I don't know if they have in stock, even if they have that in stock. So let's just continue the assembly, and it's easy enough to pull off the cover and replace the seal after the fact. Let's continue assembly and get it into the bike frame. And now a task I'm definitely not looking forward to. I can't turn these two bolts, the rear bolts, I can't turn them more than a quarter of a turn at a time. And they're also almost butted up against the engine, the heads, which means I'll have to have the engine sitting. It means I'll have to line up the engine with those bolts just touching the holes, and then try to thread them down without cross-threading anything. A task I'm really looking forward to. I'll bring you back in 45 minutes or so when this is finally torqued down. Like that. Whew. If the audio suddenly became weird, it's raining outside a lot. We're gonna see if it starts, and if it starts and runs fine, we're calling it good for this video. And then next video, which won't be next week, it will be Friday. That's my plan. I'll get a new seal before then, and we'll connect up. We'll hook up the coolant and actually start testing, and hopefully it runs fine now. We'll have to check ignition timing and confirm the rotary valve timing and all that stuff also. But now just see if it starts. It starts, and much easier than it used to start. So our starting issues were probably the completely destroyed bearings. Okay, Friday. I'll go and get a new seal and start working on that video Friday.